For 3 agonizing months, while tens of billions of taxpayer dollars evaporated into the chaos of an undeclared and seemingly endless conflict with Iran, Marco Rubio managed to completely dodge a single public testimony before Congress. Not one open hearing was held to answer for a war that has yet to formally conclude, leaving the American people completely in the dark until yesterday, when that protective wall of silence finally shattered. Senator Cory Booker cornered him under oath at the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, masterfully extracting a confession that places a devastating truth permanently on the historical record. In a stunning display of political hypocrisy, the new agreement this administration is now desperately scrambling to finalize is virtually indistinguishable from the exact same deal. They spent years ruthlessly vilifying and branding as a catastrophic national embarrassment. As the dust settles on the fortunes spent and the global havoc wreaked, we are forced to confront one simple, chilling, and utterly devastating question. After all the grandstanding and the staggering financial cost, what exactly did this war actually accomplish? Watch closely as the entire facade crumbles in real time.
Mr. Secretary, you and I talked a lot about Africa, and I raised concerns about a lot of the cuts. We're seeing globally an increase in tuberculosis, an increase in malaria cases. We see a continued ongoing on the continent HIV crisis. And the United States has pulled back from a lot of its investments in those areas. Now with the crisis with Ebola, we see that the challenges that have been brought about as a result of our surveillance, early detection, and the like. So I'm just very concerned about what the administration's strategy is, because we're clearly seeing here that what goes on the continent of Africa directly affects our public health as well.
Well, first of all, I don't agree with that assessment. I mean, first of all, it's not about cutting back. Because the response here is not just how much money you spend, it's what results you're going to get. Now, let's talk about Ebola for a second. Ebola, the outbreak in Ebola was in a war-torn, isolated rural area in the DRC. That's where that began. Since that time, our response has been very quick, very rapid.
Well, so you're saying you did not cut early detection periods. I'm not talking
I'm saying that whatever you're pointing to as a cut is not the reason why there was an Ebola outbreak.
I'm not connecting the two. I'm simply saying.
Well, you are connecting them. You said that our cuts.
Senator Rubio, I'm not trying to get in an argument with you. I would really like to actually have my questions answered. So very quickly, we cut early detection when it comes to infectious diseases on the continent. Factually, this is not an opinion. We made those cuts. We cut early warning systems on the continent.
It had nothing to do with the Ebola outbreak.
So I don't need to tell you, Secretary Rubio, that we're living in a place where an infectious disease crisis anywhere is a threat to public health everywhere. The United States has made major reductions in these areas that have put us more at risk. If you're talking about this clearly Ebola crisis, there's other things and other cuts we've made, and you see it factually. Even our own State Department personnel that I've talked to are saying we're less prepared for a global outbreak than we were before. And my worry is, specifically in a budget hearing, is this budget makes even deeper cuts into the kind of things that could prevent the next outbreak, or, as we've seen unfortunately with COVID, have us more prepared.
Yeah, I don't agree with that assessment. I don't know who told you that at the State Department.
So let's move on. My time is limited.
I know, but that's an important question. I don't want to eat up your time, but I need to answer that because I just don't agree with that.
Mr. Secretary, you can't even agree on the facts.
Because that's not accurate. I mean, again, you look at what we've entered into with these
countries. It's not accurate that we cut early detection.
Because those have all been repurposed in different arrangements that we now have with these countries. As an example,
I would like, for the record, because we're not going to cover it in my short time, if you're telling me we are as prepared or more prepared before the Trump administration came in, I'd like to see the facts.
I think when these reforms are finalized, which we're on the verge of doing, we're actually going to be better prepared. We are responding today faster, not just to humanitarian crisis, but to outbreaks than we were before. We are responding in some cases within 72 hours, are able to move funds to task, which you weren't able to do in the old system. And we're also building the capacity of these nation states through these compacts.
May I please reclaim my time to shift gears? The Strait of Hormuz, I was listening to their conversations you had with some of my colleagues. We've now seen the Strait closed for months, and you explained that we're going to see an opening of the Strait, and that ultimately the exchange we will get for that is, after that fact, we will release certain sanctions. Is that correct?
No, that's not what I said. What I said was that if they open the Straits, we will lift our blockade. The Straits and the blockade are what are interrelated.
And so for the nuclear program, in exchange for getting rid of the fissile material out of country, I imagine, is what the highly enriched uranium, we would release sanctions. Is that correct?
Well, it's not just that. It's also their enrichment activity. They would have to, they would have to make very severe and significant concessions on what they intend to enrich in the future.
And already with the March relaxing of sanctions, allowing Iranians to sell oil to the Chinese, estimates have been between $10 and $50 billion they got from that relaxing of sanctions. How much money might we see in a deal in our relaxings of sanctions in order to get rid of the highly enriched uranium and stop their enrichment?
Well, let me just tell you on that portion. The sanctions that were released on Iran were boats on the water. And so that oil was already out in the marketplace. It was sold at market rates, but the sanctions covered, and to the extent we've been able to enforce them, we have the revenues of those sales. So yeah, the Iranian oil was unsanctioned so that it could be sold, but the revenue would have to flow back to blocked accounts, which our sanctions were able to go after. We've also seized, I believe, 6 vessels in the Indo-Pacific that involved Iranian sanctioned oil on top of it. So that wasn't necessarily a trade. They didn't get $50 billion directly as a result of. They might have gotten some of it. They certainly didn't get the majority of it. They are now losing hundreds of millions of dollars a day in revenue because of the blockade. And the blockade exists because of what they're doing in the Straits.
Right. And I guess the conclusion I have, and my time's expired, is that the Strait of Hormuz was open before this unjustified war. We're now scrambling to try to find a way to get it back opened again. Not only is it causing economic havoc to our country and to residents all around this nation, families trying to make ends meet, but you see on top of that, the Iranians finding ways to leverage that, as we allowed them to do with the Chinese for tens of billions of dollars. And so my point is, before we even get to a nuclear negotiation, this regime is getting money to rebuild, purchase more drones, cause more havoc. And this is before we're even trying to get back to.
But I apologize. I don't understand how they're getting this. What revenue are you referring to?
Well, there's 2 sources of revenue we're seeing. One is the revenue from the Chinese. That's factually documented. And number 2, the revenue that you're proposing that they should receive by releasing all of their highly enriched uranium, as well as in making a commitment about their enrichment capacities.
Okay, yeah.
Hold on. And that was the exact deal that you guys vilified, that the president and you vilified President Obama from having.
Yeah. Now,
so
I
here
don't
we have a worse situation where our adversary and our enemy, who's causing havoc in the region, who is funding proxies and terrorists, has discovered, thanks to you all, the power of shutting down the Strait of Hormuz.
No, they didn't discover. They knew that a long time ago, and they've done it before.
Clearly, we all knew that a long time ago. That's why this ill-conceived war should have never happened.
Yeah, but
you have made our adversary in a stronger negotiating position. We are the strongest nation on the planet Earth, and we're in a stalemate with Iran. And now we're begging to get back into a deal that you all trashed in the first place.
There's no one begging. I don't
Clearly,
know.
this is a
Senator Booker, your time's up.
But
Senator Rubio, since he's
I do want to address some of these
respond.
points because they go to the heart of the matter. No one's begging for anything here. The Iranians might be begging because their economy's losing hundreds of millions of dollars a day. That they are losing. Understand, Iran had street protests going on before all of this started. All of those factors, economic factors in Iran, are far worse today than they were 6 months ago when those protests were happening. They have hyperinflation. Their currency's completely devalued. They're struggling to make payroll for their government workers. Iran is in a very serious situation. And if it was up to the political class there, and I understand everybody there is sort of radical in some way, but if it was up to the people that actually go to elections and wear the suits and you see on TV, they'd probably make a deal tomorrow. It's the issue they're facing is that the supreme leader and the IRGC Corps are a little bit more immune from those pressures until they can be convinced otherwise. And I think that's the direction that they're moving in, because the reality, I don't know where you're getting this perception that Iran is stronger. Iran has no navy left. They've lost a substantial percentage of their defense industrial base. That Iran has lost a substantial percentage of their missile launchers. And their economy is far worse today, and I mean far worse today, than it was 6 to 9 months ago. And they are looking at hundreds of billions of dollars of reconstruction costs just to get to where they were 6 months ago.
Mr. Rubio, you keep telling us how we're winning this war. The president keeps saying,
well, the war's over
completely
now.
Annihilated. The war is not over. And yet the American people see how we're losing at the pump and with their costs, and yet this thing still hasn't been resolved. Every day he tweets out, oh, we've obliterated them, we've annihilated them, they're going to surrender. But yet we still find ourselves spending billions of dollars a week
Senator
on
Booker,
a war abroad.
You've gone way over. And
it would be nice if we had hearings where people
Thank you, Senator Booker.
Here's what you need to understand about the economic damage first. because these numbers are yours. The International Energy Agency called the Hormuz closure the largest oil supply disruption in the history of global energy markets. The Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas, publishing research in March 2026, calculated that removing 20% of global oil supply in the second quarter of 2026 would push the average price of a barrel of oil to $98 and shrink the size of the global economy by nearly 3% over the course of a year. According to AAA, the national average gasoline price surged from under $3 a gallon before the war to over $4.50, a more than 50% increase. With GasBuddy's chief petroleum analyst estimating Americans spent an additional $28 billion more on gasoline than they would have without the conflict. Every tank of gas, every heating bill, every delivery surcharge, no congressional vote, no authorization, just a bill that every American is now paying at the pump. And look, that's before you even get to the direct military bill, which makes those numbers look modest. Pentagon officials privately disclosed to senators that the first 6 days of fighting cost more than $11.3 billion, and that figure excluded all buildup costs before the first strike landed. By April 29th, the Defense Department testified publicly that the total had climbed to $25 billion. 2 weeks later, on May 13th, they revised it upward again to approximately $29 billion. The Pentagon also sent Congress a request for an additional $200 billion emergency spending package. Trump told the public in early March that he expected the war to last 4 or 5 weeks. He was off by a few months and by tens of billions of dollars. Start with the political record he brought to that hearing because it matters. He was not a neutral diplomat. In July 2015, before this same committee, he called President Barack Obama's nuclear deal, formerly known as the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, a bad deal for the U.S. He told the committee that the Obama administration had delivered concession after concession to a regime that has American blood on its hands. He wrote a Fox News column arguing that allowing them to maintain any centrifuges on their own soil would be a colossal mistake. Those weren't off-the-cuff remarks. Those positions were the foundation of everything he stood for in foreign policy. His brand, his campaign, his entire public case for why he could be trusted with power. So what did that bad deal he spent years attacking actually require? The JCPOA, implemented in January 2016, required the country to ship out 98% of its stockpile of processed uranium. It cut the number of spinning machines used to process uranium, called centrifuges, from roughly 19,000 down to 560. It capped how far they could process their uranium, a process called enrichment, at 3.67%, a fraction of the 60% level they had eventually reached before the war. It opened every declared nuclear site to continuous monitoring by international nuclear inspectors. And here's what happened next. They did exactly that. The Center for Arms Control confirmed the country was complying with every term. So did the international inspectors in repeated quarterly reports. So did Daniel Coates, who served as Director of National Intelligence, in congressional testimony that February, just months before the agreement was scrapped on May 8th of that year. The deal worked. They killed it anyway. The 7 years after that withdrawal tell the story Booker was building toward. The country began violating the deal in 2019, precisely 1 year after the U.S. withdrew, and over the following years they tore down every limit the deal had placed on them. They stopped shipping out processed uranium. They deployed advanced centrifuges the agreement had banned. They processed uranium to 60% at a deeply buried underground nuclear site called Forau, a location the deal had explicitly banned from that activity. By May 31st, 2025, international inspectors confirmed in a confidential report seen by the Associated Press that their 60% uranium stockpile had surged by nearly 50% in just 3 months, reaching 408.6 kilograms, enough at 42 kilograms per bomb for roughly 10 nuclear weapons. The deal he called a diplomatic failure had them actively removing their uranium stockpile from the country. Abandoning it put 400 kilograms of 60% material back in their control. That's the record. The piece of this story that's gotten almost no traction, and I don't want you to miss it. On April 1st, 2026, Reuters reported him saying he didn't care about their stockpile of highly processed uranium because it was underground, a remark that critics argued undercut one of the nuclear reasons he had given for starting the war. And by the way, the Congressional Research Service noted that whether U.S. and Israeli strikes since February 28th have even affected their nuclear facilities is unclear, and the international inspectors who were pulled out in June 2025 haven't been able to inspect the attack sites. The Carnegie Endowment for International Peace warned last month that their nuclear expertise, built up over 7 years of unlimited uranium processing, cannot be destroyed from the air. What the strikes could reach were buildings. What they can't touch is knowledge. Let that sink in. So, look at what's actually being negotiated right now. Axios reported on May 24th, 2026, that negotiators from both countries had reached a tentative preliminary agreement. A 60-day ceasefire extension, the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, sanctions relief, and the start of talks on their nuclear program with the surrender of highly processed uranium as the first objective. The U.S. would lift its naval blockade. They could resume selling oil. And I want you to notice what that architecture looks like, because it matters. That's the same basic structure as the deal he spent years attacking, except the terms have gotten worse. Under the JCPOA, they shipped out virtually their entire uranium stockpile as a precondition before any sanctions relief kicked in. The tentative framework makes the surrender of that material an objective to be negotiated, while some limited economic relief begins through the ceasefire and Hormuz framework. The JCPOA came with international inspectors embedded from day one. The current framework has no inspection regime yet, and because of the centrifuge expertise they built over those years, they could build a nuclear weapon faster today, even under the same restrictions. Knowledge, unlike centrifuges, doesn't get shipped out of the country, and here's the detail that should stop you cold. The JCPOA's centrifuge restrictions at Natanz came with a built-in expiration date, 2026, per the Arms Control Association. If the U.S. had stayed in that agreement and let it run, those limits would be lifting right now on their own terms. What would still be running? The 3.67% uranium processing cap extending through 2031, international inspectors inside every declared site, the 300 kilograms uranium stockpile ceiling still enforced. Think about what that means. Instead of the country entering the phase where the deal's built-in expiration limits were quietly lifting, under active international oversight, there are 408 kgs of 60% processed material inside their borders, zero access for international inspectors, and a war launched specifically to address the nuclear problem it couldn't fully resolve. The U.S. didn't just end up pursuing the same deal it abandoned. It waged a war to do so from a worse position. The ceasefire he was defending today, the White House declared on May 1st, 2026, that hostilities had terminated. Yet AP reported today that they had stopped communicating with mediators after Israel threatened to bomb Beirut as fighting with Hezbollah intensified. He told the committee he was optimistic about renewed nuclear talks. But AP described the situation as shaky and increasingly in doubt. He was defending an arrangement that had already started coming apart when he testified. To understand what it took to get him to testify publicly at all, 6 Democratic senators held a press conference on March 9th, 2 weeks after the opening strikes, demanding he and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth testify under oath immediately. Senator Tammy Duckworth sent a formal letter to Senate Majority Leader John Thune on March 11th. The House Foreign Affairs Committee Democrats sent their own demand on March 16th. By mid-May, votes to limit the president's ability to continue the war without congressional approval had failed 3 times in the House and 7 times in the Senate. The American public was absorbing the financial and economic cost of this war, while the person most responsible for designing and running it went over 90 days without giving a single public accounting of it. Today was the first crack in that wall. The economic argument he advanced in his testimony, and this is the part I want you to catch, distinguishes between two groups within the country, the civilian political class that would take a deal, and the supreme leader and the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, the military force that actually controls the nuclear program, who remain shielded from economic pressure. He names them separately, he describes them differently, and then he offers that distinction as evidence that things are going well. What he never explains is how maximum economic pressure on the first group produces nuclear concessions from the second. The U.S. has spent 3 months and tens of billions of dollars devastating those most inclined toward a deal, while the decision makers on the actual nuclear question remain, by his own description, unmoved. That's not a theory of victory, that's a description of a strategy hitting the wrong targets. The Carnegie Endowment adds the longer-term consequence. Their demonstrated willingness to close the Strait of Hormuz has now shown every future hardliner immune to economic suffering. They don't personally absorb exactly how much power that narrow shipping passage holds over even the most powerful military on Earth. The capability to disrupt global energy doesn't expire when a deal gets signed. And that brings us to the original justification for starting this war in the first place. Senator Mark Warner, the senior Democrat on the Intelligence Committee, told CNN State of the Union that he saw no evidence they were planning a first strike against the U.S. Meanwhile, on March 4th, the president publicly acknowledged his decision was based on his own opinion that Iran was going to attack first, not a confirmed intelligence conclusion, as Warner's account makes clear. The Arms Control Association also documented before the war that their uranium stockpile, while dangerously large, had not yet reached weapons grade. A diplomatic path existed. International inspectors had confirmed the same. The war was chosen when diplomacy hadn't been exhausted, and yesterday was the first time that question was put on the record under oath. So here's the actual verdict on what that hearing revealed. Every military achievement he cited, every confirmed weakening of their military capability, falls into the same category. Conventional military, ships, launchers, facilities, industrial capacity, none of it nuclear. The stated justification for this war was nuclear, and the Congressional Research Service in a March 2026 assessment said that whether strikes since February 28th have affected the country's nuclear facilities is, in their exact words, unclear. The war's verified accomplishments sit entirely in the category that wasn't the reason it started. Its progress in the category that was remains officially unknown. The Strait of Hormuz closure proved a decisive pressure point, one that clearly shaped the terms of this negotiation. And I want you to remember this. The next time someone tells you this, war was necessary to stop that country from going nuclear. The Secretary of State, who built his entire career calling that same deal a national embarrassment, testified publicly before Congress for the very first time since the war began, without a settled answer for what this war achieved against the nuclear threat he launched it to stop. Thanks for tuning in, and I hope this video gave you something worth thinking about. Leave a comment below with your thoughts because your voice matters in this conversation. If this video was helpful or interesting, please give it a like, click the bell icon so you are notified every time I post new content. Subscribe for more political news reactions and analysis. Thanks again for watching, and I will catch you guys next time.